Protests were held in several cities after yesterday's decision by a Louisville grand jury not to charge any police officers directly involved in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor. In other words, the use of deadly force was found to have been justified, even though Taylor herself was unarmed and in her own home. The response in Boston last night was a gathering held at Franklin Park, organized by a group concerned with police accountability and stemming violence. To tell us about the reaction and other new developments at Violence in Boston, Inc. is its founder, Monica Cannon-Grant. Thank you very much for being with us again, Monica.
Absolutely, Chris. Great to be with you again.
Monica, we've seen in recent months this sort of at least a growing consensus around changes in police accountability in Boston. How do you process that, and at the same time, what happened yesterday in the case around Breonna Taylor?
So I just think it's all intertwined. I think that we have fallen short on holding the police accountable when it comes to legislation, and a lot of the legislation that gets pushed through is weak and watered down. We've been asking for qualified immunity to be diminished and gotten rid of, and the legislation that was put forth by the legislators didn't get rid of it. It was like, we're going to water it down to make people comfortable. And the issue is police officers are literally allowed to kill people and not be brought to justice. And that's what they did with Breonna Taylor. There's no way you can say that the police are allowed to kill someone in their sleep with a no-knock warrant in the wrong house, and the only charge you bring is in regards to the walls and the bullets and her neighbors. She wasn't even included in the indictment that we did see happen yesterday. So it's disrespectful on all levels.
Because what also goes on here is that when you try to charge a police officer criminally, that sets the bar so high, it's almost hard to hold them accountable in any other way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I have yet to see them be held accountable. They basically, even the officer who actually is charged with committing the crime sent an email talking trash to his colleagues that was in the news yesterday about how protesters are thugs and he's standing with his brothers in law enforcement. Essentially, the police department and police departments across this country operate like a gang. The same thing they don't want community to do, they engage in. They have a code where they don't tell on each other, and they stick together, and they ensure that they don't get in trouble for it at all. And that's the very thing that they claim to be against when it comes to community, but they engage in that same activity.
Well, what was going on in the Breonna Taylor case was a group of police officers trying to get evidence, but doing it in a way in which they certainly anticipated the possibility of violence. Isn't that really a structural or even a policy thing that needs to be addressed?
So I'm gonna be honest with you. If I engaged in the activity that officer did, we wouldn't be having a policy or it's structural change. So to answer your question, yes, but the issue is that if I engaged in the same activity that officer engaged in with shooting Breonna Taylor, there wouldn't be a question on if I would be convicted, charged, and charged with murder and sentenced. There's white supremacy at play, there's discrimination, there's systematic racism at play. It's definitely a structural issue, but the issue with that is this. If we look at the history of the police department, they were never created to protect and serve Black people to begin with. The structure of the police department and the base of its creation was to catch and return slaves. So essentially, we're asking a structure that wasn't built for us to do something different than what it was built for. Yes, it is an issue that needs to happen from within the inside. We have yet to see that happen. And for someone to be in their house sleeping, minding their business, and the police shoot through and kill this person, that is homicide, that is murder.
I want to ask you about another overlapping concern, because you have made note of the figures around shootings in Boston this year and homicides. Homicides are up by 50%, shootings by more than 30%. Maybe police are part of the solution, but mainly, where do you see the solution to that?
So we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. And the issue is people think that the police are supposed to be there to prevent crime, when in all actuality, they benefit off of crime. That's how they are paid. So I would love to see us defund our police department and put that money towards prevention. The violence prevention budget decreases every year on a state and on a city level. So I would love to see that money put into prevention, because at this point, every situation that happens around violence in the community, we're reacting to it. We have yet to get in a position of preventing what's happening. And I highlight the numbers because they love to talk about when crime is down, but they're extremely silent as the increase happens. We are 50% increase on homicides, 30% increase on shootings. As of September 13th, 200 people have been shot in the city of Boston. And you know, so many people go, well, it's not Chicago and it's not this place and it's not that place. The only reason those are not homicides is because we have one of the best healthcare systems in the country. And the second reason is inexperienced shooters. We're dealing with PTSD shooters.
There was also research done at least a couple of years ago saying that, you know, with regard to the clearance rate in Boston for homicide, which has been long a problem, maybe one of the factors is that police are not doing enough legwork around non-fatal shootings. Should they be doing more? Should there be more resources put into that?
So I guess my issue is they know exactly what to do, because when it comes to non-fatal shootings of white people, those numbers are extremely, like, they solve a lot of those crimes. It's just when they involve Black people that they don't solve them, which is very discriminatory and purposeful. And then also, I think we need to talk about the police department overall and them being part of the actual crime that transpires by leaking information of victims, by not allowing and providing resources for victims who have been victims of crime. I mean, every year they advocate for more money. And at this point, you have officers making upward of $400,000 a year, and we're not seeing the results.
Well, as you mentioned last night, and I think this is something that you've been saying for quite a while, and others have been saying as well, that the problems with violence, they overlap very tightly with poverty. And you're also trying to address that in another level right now with the new Social Impact Center in Hyde Park. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to do there?
Yeah, so most of us know that violence is a symptom of poverty, which is man-made, right? And oftentimes when we work with young people who are involved, street involved, we wrap around that young person and provide the young person resources. But for our social impact center, our thought process is that young person comes from a household. And sometimes the household has just as many disparities, which is causing whatever is happening with the young person. And so when we acquire working with a young person, we are also interested in taking on that household to make sure that the parents or the guardians have whatever they need in order for us to achieve success with that young person. Oftentimes these young people go home to houses, there is no electricity, or maybe there's no food, or maybe there's employment issues, or maybe there's struggles with paying the rent. Right now, because of the pandemic and the moratorium that's due to be lifted, there are going to be so many people who are struggling to pay their rent and going through the eviction process. And so what we're trying to do with working with other organizations is figure out how to help those people, because we can foresee exactly what's going to happen. The purpose of the Social Impact Center is to highlight that most of the violence and poverty that is happening in our communities is because of the disparity that already existed. The only thing COVID did was exacerbate pre-existing issues, and we're trying to address those by wrapping around families as a whole.
Finally, want to go, there was a gathering held last night at Franklin Park. This was an immediate reaction to the grand jury decision in Louisville. But beyond that, what would you like to see people doing as far as the activism in Boston and how that relates to reforms? What do you see happening in the near future, at least?
So I guess for me, it's first, listen to Black women, show up for us. And not just when there's elections. We would love to see, for instance, Governor Baker's whole cabinet is all white people. There's not a Black woman there. There's not a Black person there. Those things have to change. That is part of the problem. They love to call us when it's time to vote, but when it comes to decision making, we're few and far between. There are legislators that are Black, but there needs to be a conversation of reach into the community and actually talk to the community and see what we want. Don't just advocate for us without speaking to us. And I think the other thing is, you know, understand that Black women have led things in this country for years and years and years. We know how to get things done. And so I would be looking forward to people actually reaching in and showing up. One of the things that was disheartening was the amount of people that weren't there when it came to showing up for protecting Black women, but were the first ones to call when there is a need or there's something to get done. I want the same urgency when we protest for everyone else around Black women. And I want that across the board, not just white people, but also non-Black people of color as well.
Finally, Monica, if people want to find out more about violence in Boston or take advantage of services at the Social Impact Center, is there some way they can pursue that?
Absolutely. You can visit our website, violenceonboston.org. And there you will find an email address. You can email us. It'll instruct you, depending on what your issue is, who you should contact. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Violence in Boston. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you. Monica Cannon Grant from Violence in Boston, Inc. We'll have more news in just a moment.